Of all the Midwest cities, the one I knew best was St. Paul, and it was a crook's haven, boasted Alvin "Creepy" Karpis, the kidnapper and bank robber whom J. Edgar Hoover anointed public enemy number one. Karpis, also known as Old Creepy, goes on to say, "Every criminal of any importance in the 1930s made his home at one time or another in St. Paul. If you were looking for a guy you hadn't seen for a few months, you usually thought of two places, prison or St. Paul. If he wasn't locked up in one, he was probably hanging out in the other." Hello, I'm Charlie Rogers with the State Archives of the Minnesota Historical Society. Like the rest of the country in the 1930s, the city of St. Paul was struggling with the Great Depression. Unemployment was rampant, people had lost their savings, and Prohibition was in full swing. But something else was happening in St. Paul in the 1930s. An unwritten agreement between the St. Paul police and criminals allowed St. Paul to be a safe haven for the nation's bank robbers, stick-up artists, kidnappers, extortionists, and killers. This layover agreement was between criminals and the St. Paul Police Chief John O'Connor, but still a lot of crime happened in St. Paul in the 1930s. Along with Fred Barker of the Ma Barker gang, Karpis was involved in the kidnapping of William Ham in 1933 and Edward G. Bremer in 1934. Karpis was personally arrested by J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, after Hoover was accused of not actually arresting anyone himself. Even the well-known gangster John Dillinger passed through St. Paul, along with his moll, Evelyn Frechette. In March of 1934, St. Paul police had John and Evelyn surrounded in a Lexington Avenue apartment building in St. Paul, but Dillinger shot his way out and escaped. In July of that year, Dillinger was shot and killed in Chicago. This revolver, which was used in the shootout with Dillinger, is in our three-dimensional objects collection and was donated by the family of the police officer. These are just a few documents from a set of criminal history files transferred by the Minnesota Criminal Apprehension Bureau to the State Archives of the Minnesota Historical Society. The files date from 1928 to 1982, and there are a variety of documents for 51 criminals. Besides the files for Karpis, Barker, and Dillinger, there are documents for Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker, Dutch Schultz, Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson, and many more. The files include mugshots, fingerprint cards, correspondence with the FBI and law enforcement agencies nationwide, wanted posters, criminal history transcripts or rap sheets, and newspaper clippings. Along with the criminal history files, also available are the fascinating research files of Paul Maccabee, who wrote the book John Dillinger Slept Here, A Crook's Tour of Crime and Corruption in St. Paul, 1920 to 1936, plus many other books, photographs, and newspapers. On the library's website, there is a history topics link for gangsters in St. Paul. And remember, crime does not pay. Alvin Karpis served 33 years in prison, 25 of them at Alcatraz, and was eventually paroled in 1969.